al-Bashir of the northern part invaded the region called Darfur and targetedly attacked places in which artifacts of historical and cultural significance existed, mainly because he knew that southern Sudanese will go and protect them. The reality on the ground was that 20,000 people died there before a UN commission, specially enforced to take those artifacts into Switzerland, was commissioned by Commissioner Mukesh of UN, and the situation backdrop. Because Omar al-Bashir realized that the only way in which we can save those artifacts and stop the warfare is by relocating those artifacts. This is how our world looks like. But let's realize how their world looks like. Look at another example. When Pakistan seceded from India some years ago, the reality is that the Muslim people in Pakistan invaded the Hindu temples in Kashmir, knowing that Hindu people are going to protect them. The UN and we didn't intervene in order to save them, and more than 1 million people died protecting those artifacts. Those artifacts were all destroyed and people died on the same time. We believe that on our side of the house, we're going to make two things. Firstly, we're going to enhance accessibility to those artifacts for our generation, for further generations. And secondarily, we're going to improve the way in which wars are currently made up. Like model first, how we are going to do it. We're going to do it under UN Parliament. We're going to create a commission that's going to specially move these artifacts to different types of countries. We believe this debate should not be about Western imperialism. We're not going to move artifacts from Iraq to the United States of America. We're going to move them to Switzerland or Norway or other neutral countries that no unstable country has any sort of problems. Thirdly, we believe that this is a common practice with artifacts that are currently privately owned. So the only thing that we're doing is that we're enhancing the paradigm for artifacts that are not under private ownership. Cool. Before entering into my argumentation, why I believe this is going to be efficient? For two reasons. Because it's cheap, because it's easy to relocate them, and secondarily, because we're going to do it immediately and preemptively before anything is destroyed or before people are going to die protecting them. 2 points for Prime Minister. Firstly, on targets of warfare, secondarily, on preservation. First point, targets of warfare. We believe that those kinds of artifacts are significant for those people. When we're talking about unstable countries such as Iraq or Syria, we're talking about countries that are not economically or socially developed. So the only way in which you can form your identity in those countries is by accessing cultural and historical heritage. So those artifacts are ways in which people access their own identity and ways in which people are constructing their identity. So we believe those are very important for those people. But sure, what will be the perception of those people who are going to relocate the artifacts? Of course they'll get mad. Of course people will not like the fact that those artifacts are in other countries. But firstly, we believe that on the utilitarian calculus, we win because we enhance accessibility on the utilitarian ground for them and for further generations. And secondarily, because we believe that the media will react in a different way. The reason for which we know that artifacts are destroyed because it's very important for those countries and the media tells it all the time. But when we're just going to move them with the UN Commission, we believe this is not going to be the most important news in any part of the country. So not all people will get mad. We'll be mitigating this. But the reality is that the reason for which those people have this perception is because they do not understand the risk that they have if we let them there. They do not understand that groups like Daesh, ISIS, are going to attack specifically those artifacts because they know that Sunni people and Shia people are always going to protect their culture. So if they would know the fact that the risks that are there, we believe that they would agree with that. They would agree with our motion. Just because they do not know the risk doesn't mean that the risks don't exist. It doesn't mean that the best thing to do for them will be this motion. So we're just going to prove that this is better, even if they do not know it's better. We still win on another utilitarian calculus. But most importantly in this argument, about the nature of conflicts. We believe that in unstable countries such as Iraq, Syria, Sudan, and Pakistan, the conflicts are cultural. Shia versus Sunni, white Muslim versus black animist. Those conflicts are specifically created in such a way in which they attack culture. So the way in which they exist is based on culture. This is problematic because if we let those artifacts exist in those countries, we will give them a reason to fight for. Because the first thing I'm going to do as a Sunni who creates his identity based on those artifacts is to attack Shia by destroying those artifacts that create his Shia identity. We're going to first and foremost target their humanity, and because this humanity is created by those artifacts, we believe this will be the prime target in warfare. Why is this so wrong? On two layers analysis. First, but basically we call it resentment, right? Firstly, on people, because people will see that these artifacts that construct their identity are destroyed one by one, and they die being unable to protect them. This creates frustration, this creates tension, this creates exacerbation of conflict because they want to retaliate. This is why now Shia militias in Iraq are destroying Sunni artifacts in Syria, because ISIS, a Sunni organization, was destroying Shia artifacts, and people were willing to retaliate. But more importantly, we believe we're talking about governments. In those countries, governments are mainly ideologically based, ethnic based. We see Iraq under al-Maliki. The reality is that if ISIS is going to destroy Shia artifacts, and the government is composed by Shia people, the governments are only going to employ Shia militias in order to further attack artifacts that are of Sunni nature, and this is going to exacerbate the conflict at a level of government. When the conflict exacerbates both for the people, by the people, and by government, we believe this is an enormous threat. I'm going to move on to my next argument, but before that, Gilad.
How specifically do you define a country to be stable or unstable?
Okay, we believe that the United Nations is more capable than two teams in a debate to define what's stable or not. We believe that we're going to have a lot of discuss about this, but for sure, Iraq is an unstable country, right? We're going to talk about clear cases. That's what we're going to want. If you want, we believe that if we save Iraq but not save another country, we're still waiting on the utilitarian arguments. Second point in this debate about preservation, two layers. Preserving the cultural heritage and preserving the nature of war. Preserving the cultural heritage. Firstly, we believe that culture has an intrinsic value. Culture is valuable because we all care about us. Because, as I've stated before, it defines us as persons. But more importantly, for further generations. We might be able to access those artifacts, but people that are not born yet are not able. We believe it's not okay to let those artifacts there just because some people might get mad, and don't allow people in the future to access the same type of cultural identity as we access just because we are afraid of what might happen. We believe that people in the future have the same right as us to access their cultural heritage. This is why we win this sport. Lastly, on how to preserve war. The reality on the ground is it's quite dubious that we're going to intervene for artifacts, but we're not always intervening for conflict, for women, to save people, right? But the reason for which we do that is we accept the fact that sometimes war is necessary. War is a necessary form of politics. But when we do not allow war as a form of politics, it's when it crosses some limits. We believe that war is acceptable when it's combatant versus combatant. But it is not okay when you're human being versus human being, where your only cause is to destroy his cultural identity, his identity. This is why we intervene in cases like genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, because it's no longer attacking combatants, but attacking him as a human being, destroying him as a human being. And at the end of the day, we increase accessibility to those artifacts for actual and further generations, and we better keep the nature of war. I'm genuinely proud to propose.
Tired of Sudda's exaggeration in which he says like 1 million people died in order to protect two artifacts. Realistically speaking, this is not true. This is not something that we should pursue as mutually and being a constant. A few levels of rebuttal before moving on into my constructive speech. First of all, they talk about how much of a big it is, how much people die for it in order to protect it. But what we're saying, and what we're realistically saying, is that logistically speaking, people are still going to die in order to protect the cargo. When you have, for example, banks, the moment in which the money is more vulnerable is in the moment in which you transport it, in the moment in which you're trying to get it from point A to point B. Because realistically speaking, this is not a 5-minute road in which you're taking a walk. People are still going to die. Maybe, and even if we accept that not as many people will die, still a significant portion of people will die just in order to get them there. Moreover, what you're doing today is that you're actually taking artifacts and temples and whatnot. What we're saying is that, again, logistically speaking, it's pretty hard to move an entire city that has cultural reference and cultural importance from point A to B. And even if you don't take the whole city and you say like, look, we're only going to take statues. The reason why statues have an important cultural reference is because they're in that context. For example, we believe to be essential that we have those statues in that city because we understand the context in which they exist. We understand the reason why you want them there. For people to admire, for people to understand, and people to get empowerment to this point. No. What we're saying and what I asked in the POI was, when do you decide when a country is stable or not? Because by their premise, look, Iraq is an unstable country, we're going to take them away. What we're saying is that realistically speaking, the moment in which you're taking artifacts away, you're only going to return them when you consider these countries to be stable. Most of the times, we're talking about countries such as South Sudan, you're currently talking about countries such as Iraq, that realistically speaking, they're never going to be stable from an objective point of view. They're never going to be returned to these countries, and these people will never be able to benefit from them more than in my own constructive search. No. What we're saying is that, look, what you're actually doing in the moment in which you're sending them away, you're creating a bad, very, very bad image. In which you're saying that, look, we can't protect them for ourselves, we're letting other people do it for us. And why is that? Because you're actually going and portraying a sign of weakness. In the moment in which you have two cars, in the moment in which you're opening one door and saying that, look, it's very vulnerable, you're going to have much more of an incentive for ISIS troops, for example, to invade the territory. Same thing happened in the interventionism of Iraqi expansion of ISIS. In the moment in which US troops left Iraq, what realistically happened is that even though this wasn't true, even though the Iraqi forces weren't weak, the sign of weakness gave enough courage to the ISIS troops to just go on, to just try and get as much territory as possible. It's all about image. It's all about mentality, and it's all about what you're actually portraying in the moment in which you're trying to do it. Moreover, we don't accept this conspiracy theories in which you're going to have Shia and Sunni kind of conflicts over what you're actually defending, over what you're actually doing. We don't see how this point is actually constructive and actually showing that we have a legitimate reason to ship these type of artifacts in another country just because there's some internal conflict. You're going to have internal conflicts in each and every country. You're still going to have internal conflicts between Shia and Sunni minorities in the countries in which you're shipping them. So you're not actually avoiding any sort of conflict. You're only going to get viewers. No, now let's move on to my constructive. And now, no thanks. What we're actually talking is like, look, the premise of my argument is that, look, cultural significance is unique. It is a premise. It is a premise of us that only people in Iraq can understand the importance of the Iraqi faith. And while an American soldier would understand why Stephen the Great, the sword of Stephen the Great is so important for us, majority of people won't. They won't get any in a second, they won't get any reference, and they won't understand why they are important. As such, just because we have them there, nobody, we believe that should access them and that should benefit from them will not do so. Don't you agree?
Sir, please explain me why I have more of a right to access them than further generations that will lack this right because they're being destroyed right now by Daesh.
No, the same difference is that, look, what you're actually saying is that maybe we're still going to lose some artifacts, but that we're still going to have the possibility to have some of them protected in Iraq and all of these countries. In the moment in which you're talking about future generations, you're talking about future generations of Americans, of people that are from Switzerland or whatever countries that don't understand what these type of things are. Because on the premise that these countries will not be unstable, will not be even considered, even if they are, they will never be returned, and people will not benefit, and people won't understand. Let's go further on. Moreover, look, what we're saying is that these kind of countries will take them and not turn them back. For example, what the United States or whatever country can do is the same thing that the United States did with Cuba. For example, we're going to have less economical sanctions on Cuba if it makes some political change. They will be able to use these artifacts as political leverage in order to have some sort of change. As such, they're going to say like, look, we're going to give you some artifacts back if you do this kind of change, which is a direct implication and the direct change of the sovereignty of the countries that we value very much. We believe that countries should be able to be independent. Moreover, let's talk about the Romanian treasure. Russia, we said like, look, let's give the Romanian treasures to Russia. We're totally going to get them back after World War II. What's happening right now? We still don't have them. We're still not seeing them. Three, what we're saying is like, if you want to talk about pyramids, if you want to talk about the pyramids in the British National Museum, because they're out of the context and people don't understand how hard they were built, like all of the kind of things that were there, people don't understand the real significance of it. We would much rather have these kind of things in Egypt for people to benefit from them. Yes, we accept that, look, 3 out of 10 are going to be destroyed, but the 7 will still be accessible to the people and will still be able to learn from them. No, even if they do, like even if we gave them back, the moment in which you're sending them away, you're creating this perception. And it as in, even if we would send all of these artifacts back, the perception that you're going to do is like, look, it is very important, like these people who think that you're not going to get them back. We're never going to trust Russia again with more treasure because we believe that they're going to take them back. Because the bad reputation of the Western countries that they have created, they don't trust us, they won't be able, and we'll create more segregation in which we're basing ourselves on a relationship that is no trust. Look, now, what we're saying is that these kind of countries are defenseless. They're a door open in a car. Just because there's a thief that might steal something doesn't mean that I should not buy a phone. I should not show the sign of weakness in which I'm saying like, look, I should not get this product, I should not get to protect these kind of things, just because there's a chance that they destroy it. And what we're saying is that even if people decide to die in order to protect them, if people are willing, and people decide that it is that important for them in order to do that, we should let them. We should let people die in order to protect that kind of important. We see patriots that sacrifice for their countries. We see Romanians sacrificing themselves for the revolution in the 1989 because they thought that democracy is an important value. Same thing, same principle applies here. If people understand and decide that this is an important point of view, then they should do so. For all these reasons, because we have portrayed specifically who these people are and whether or not they're going to get them back, and then the perception that they're going to have, I've never been more proud to propose this.
In our work, the Romanian thesaurus would be in Romania right now. Why? Because the Romanian thesaurus was not given by the Romanians to the Russians, it was stolen during the war. And we believe that they're lacking reality. And moreover, we believe that even in the countries of Romania, where we are really educated, and most of the society knows about the fact that the Romanian artifacts are in Moscow right now, we don't actually see that people are really mad about that and are creating a massive backlash on this issue. We believe that these things will not really happen. Now, before going to my session, we'll speak about the cultural and historical heritages and matters of further knowledge. I have three main points. First, efficiency. They said, A, that even if we take them away, people will still die when we move things from the point A to point B. Yes, that's why we do it preemptively before the conflict starts. That's what the motion is. Second, they said that, oh, but samples will still be there. Okay, we are solving part of the solution, not the entire thing. On a utilitarian basis, we are getting benefits. Sure. No, thank you. Moreover, they brought the point that people, if we move things to Britain or to France, people will not understand that very. Like, really, myself, I have been to the British Museum, I have seen Egyptian artifacts, and I believe I can understand their meaning. We don't actually see that only people in Egypt will understand Egyptian things. From this point of view, we don't actually see how we are having efficiency. On the other hand, we are thinking we are pretty efficient. Because instead of furthering conflicts, because people are subjective about their culture, about religion, and so on and so forth, we are moving them away, and we are making conflicts less prone to stay there for years and years and years. So actually, we are bringing more benefits, because it's cheaper to send a plane right now to Sudan and solve the things. No. Second point, about how we define stability, abuses, and perception. First of all, they brought us the point about how there were abuses in the past, how the people in the UK stole Egyptian goods, or some Russians stole the thing. You know why those things happen? Because we live in a period of colonialism. It's not happening anymore. We believe that that's why we are going to the UN Commission to do those things. Like really, what do you believe that Norway will do with Iraqi artifacts? I think they'll return them back. I think it's a point in which you believe that it is absurd. Thank you, sir and madam. I think it's a point in which you say that the will not just abuse of them, especially because you have UN commissions, and UN does not want to destroy its own perception. It just to keep some artifacts in the museum in Norway. No things. Moreover, they brought the point out how we define stability. If you really have a definition, if a country is prone to have a really serious issue like a war and those things are destroyed, then it's an unstable country. And for instance, in South Sudan, those artifacts were brought back 3 months ago. And we believe from this point of view that they were kept, yes, in the UK for 2 years. What's the main issue? Moreover, they brought the point that people will go have a massive backlash because we perceive the West as stealing those goods. I think things are a little bit more nuanced. We perceive the conflict between the West and the East, as between colonies and oppressors. But sorry, it's a little bit more deep. Because people in Algeria, they don't hate the Stardust. They hate France. Because France was the colony itself. And we are saying, yes, if you are going to take stuff from Algeria, we won't take it to France, we will take it to Switzerland or Germany. And people will not have this cultural backlash that will harm. No, thank you, sir. Moreover, they brought the point about how those countries will feel weak and how ISIS will be even more powerful. On in the same logic, on the same basis, we should never intervene in Iraq because we will send a message that the Iraqi army is weak. But guess what? It is weak. We need intervention. They are not able to protect these things. From this perspective, we believe that yes, we need the interventions. Yes, Greg.
The only rebuttal that you're giving us is like, look, they return them back. You're giving examples that we don't even know they're true. Explain a mechanism through which they would return them back.
If you want to know more about South Sudan, you can Wikipedia after the debate. Okay? And yes, it's true. If you don't believe me, I have a reason not to believe. Moreover, you think that those things that happened in the past happened because we does not have checks and balances in international relations. Colonialism can't happen in the 21st century. Abuses like the Russians abuses won't happen. And really, we don't see why these countries actually benefit from having bigger museums. So what? They have more tourists or what? Now, moreover, come to the point of conflict. What will happen in conflicts in them? We believe that culture is very important in conflict. Because after colonialism, basically colonialism drafted arbitrary borders all over Africa and Asia and in the Middle East. And that's why we have Africa with a lot of ethnical and cultural tensions. That's why we had the 60-court treaty in the Middle East that created those disparities between Shia and Sunni. The reality is that there are a lot of countries in these areas that do not have a culture, they don't have one culture, one ethnicity, and so on and so forth. So the possibility when you have a conflict for those agents there to use culture as a means to incentivize war to happen is very, very high. And really this happens a lot. And it can happen very fast even in stable countries. For instance, when the Arab Spring started in Egypt, one of the first things that were destroyed was the National Museum of History in Cairo. And we believe that have lost a very important artifacts there when it happened. Moreover, we believe that these things further conflict because just a military conflict is a conflict between combatant versus combatant conflict. But when you go towards culture, when you go things that people believe that are inherent to them, you are creating a conflict between mankind versus mankind. And this makes people more and more angry. It gives more political capital, for instance, to the Shia right now because the Sunni oppress them and so on and so forth. So I think it's our duty to do that because those conflicts are further and people are not able to do it. And moreover, we say that yes, people will be angry because they do not perceive the risk right now. They say yes, maybe the museum will not be destroyed. But we believe that people do not perceive risk all the time. It's our duty as a state to combat that. Even in Western states, we realize that risks are, people have risk aversion, we intervene. We should do that. Now, going to my audience. No, thank you. We believe that in museums and in those places, there are not only statues and artifacts, but museums have massive art. Because how museums look like is not only a place for things to show, it has a lot of things that are not shown, like books, manuscripts, and so on and so forth. That's what's happening next. And we believe that we still have massive gaps in knowledge. We don't want to lose those gaps. And that's why we believe that if we take these artifacts back to countries where we can study them, it will be a major benefit. Because reality speaking, in countries like Sudan, Iraq, and so on and so forth, there is no academia, there is no research. You can't detect, for instance, you cannot have the infrastructure to detect the age of certain artifacts. And we believe that this is bad. We should study them even more because we'll make the humanity know even more things. And we believe that first, imagine what would be the benefit. We will be able to centralize a lot of historical artifacts and have academic study. And maybe in the future, we'll understand more of those values. Maybe in the future, we'll bridge the gap between the West and the East if we do that. Maybe we'll understand how to solve those conflicts better because we know history better. And moreover, we believe that when the demand for these things in developed countries, we should bring that to the public. It's a pity that people can't understand their history because it's our common heritage as mankind. And moreover, we believe that it is the moment in which you bring culture to the West from the East, you make people less prone to say that the East people in those countries are barbarians. When British Museum appeared, that was the moment in which society understood the fact that countries like China and Egypt, they are not barbarians, but they are highly developed, and you are actually increasing things like stereotypes towards those countries. At the end of the day, we believe that first of all, it's better for them, and it's better for those people there, because they can't protect them. At the end of the day, if conflicts are inherently culturally in a lot of this area, it's our duty to protect those things, and we believe that we are not going to abuse them. I'm proud to propose. Thank you.
If there's one thing that I'm pretty sure that I've done my research straight on, is that in history, a lot of individuals really fight for the notion of culture. What does culture mean and why is it so important for a nation? It's the manifestation not only of religion, but going to give those monuments back. It's not a question of if, sure, we can agree that you're going to give them back. The question is when you're going to do it. Because if you want to tackle only countries such as Iraq, Syria, Sudan, so on and so forth, it means that you will never be able to prove that they are going to become stable in any time soon. Which means that you are taking away something for their culture for an unlimited time. Why is this so detrimental? We say that you are taking away the possibility of people to express their culture, to express their possibility of taking advantage of that culture in order for the goals to be achieved, in order for the possibility of stability to be achieved. Why? We say that in another context, we will call heroes people that sacrifice their life in order to fight, right? In this context, they choose to call them crazy casualties, right? The people that actually prioritize culture more than prioritize their life, the people that want to stay in front of the mosque in order to defend it, they are just those casualties that we want to fight for. But if they are doing that willingly, if they are putting willingness into this, if they want to defeat those monuments, if we've seen so many times people sacrificing their life in order to fight for culture, one question arises. Is it culture that important for individuals? And what happens if we're actively taking it away? I'm going to answer this in my extension, right? We say that everything that you do at the end of the day, just considering all of those artifacts that you take away, dispensable cultural roots. But unfortunately, this is not how they look like. In Middle East, for example, most of the things that will come under the motion are mosques, people in which, places in which people pray, so on and so forth. Why do they value them so much? Because they gave them stability when they think that they've lost everything. Why is it relevant? Because when they see monuments of their heroes, when they see monuments of people who gained independence of their country, they get some sort of much more of a hope in order to fight for every day. They get much more of a hope in order to keep themselves together when nothing else goes the way they expect it to do. We believe that we're taking this away from people and taking safety away from individuals even more than the status quo, taking away from individuals their possibility of manifesting the love that they get for culture is completely cruel. We don't encourage this at the end of the day. Now, tackling my last point of rebuttal, which is of this extension. What you can basically say about this extension in one phrase is that we want people from West to have accessibility to the history of people from the Middle East. Sure, acceptable. We can do this by a lot of other means. We don't have to take away all the historical context, all the historical places from those countries in order to do some research on them. Sure, you are enhancing the thing that you are considering those countries only subjects of research in order for you to find out more about their culture. We believe that there are a lot of other means to do that. We don't want to encourage this perspective because what you're going to arrive when it comes to society is just the perspective that they took away our possibility to manifest our affection to culture just to do some research on it. I'll answer that point about perception. Some people are going to be mad. That's how terrorists are. There are America who is intervening, saying that nothing bad is going to happen. There are going to be some people rioting, some people who are going to be mad. Look what we've done here. Yeah, people really fight for things. Religion may seem something really crazy to fight for, so it may seem culture. But even if you want it or not, people really get mad when you take away parts of their identity. That's how reality works, even if you don't have 100% culture.
Do you think that the US will harm its political capital in the Middle East for some artifacts?
Yeah, like the US has harmed its political capital through a lot of interventions in the last decade. Now, moving on to my example. What I'm going to tackle, the intervention is inside culture and why we believe that it's highly detrimental. We have seen, analyzing the international politics of the United Nations, that their common source of failure when it comes to intervention in the Middle East is the omnipresence, the intervention in every single aspect of citizens' life, and the social engineering tendency, which are precisely aspects of this motion, right? We believe that in the social perspective, when we're taking away culture, religion, what things that are making the lives of individuals better every single day, they feel even more targeted. They feel that those countries, the United Nations itself, the United Nations Security Council, however you may want to portray the West to sound more classical, is going to fuel the rhetoric of the terrorist association that we're dealing with, such as ISIS and Al-Shabaab. Why? Because they are going to use the rhetoric. Look, they are taking even your culture away. Government party doesn't promise that you're going to be offered protection for your culture. You're going to be offered protection for your culture. We're going to value your culture. We're going to defend your culture. This is exactly what they are hanging on. Another intervention coming from the United Nations in order to individuals with no reason. Why? Because we've taken away aspects of culture, we really wait for a response from that people, because they know that we know that they come here to give us a response every single time we've seen so far in the last decades, right? Even more than that, at a very meta level. We believe that we're even diminishing the culture, the relevance of culture. Why? Because we're putting it in a country that doesn't have any background and affection and connection with those culture. They don't even benefit from it, just subjects of research, nothing more. We have so many means, Mr. Speaker, to have subjects of research. We don't think that we want to sacrifice their last hope in order to get stability when they are living in a wasteland, in order to create peace, right? We believe that we're declaring them war zones by taking the last beauty that was last in the hands of individuals. For all of those reasons, I've never been prouder to work.
Mr. Speaker, the real comparative with this debate is not having artifacts as a museum in Switzerland and in Darfur, it's having them as a museum in Switzerland and not at all. This is the real comparative of the debate. This is why it is unstable countries and doing it immediately. Because if we don't do it immediately, there's a very, very high chance of them disappearing, right? This is the real comparative. And opposition always try to put forward the idea that, no, we should give them a chance. They might be able to protect them. The problem is not that harsh. You saw the video, the presentation video. They were hammering them down. This is the type of context in which we're trying to intervene. Not some potential harm and just furthering our imperialistic Western views, right? So I think that a lot of the opposition case are fundamental exaggerations, and I'm going to have 4 points. Firstly, about efficiency. Secondly, about artifacts as war targets. Thirdly, about responsibility. And fourthly, about a societal reaction, because that was a big point in their case, right? First point. Now, we agree. The United Nations may not be that good at military intervention, right? They probably blue helmets are not very good at intervening military. If there's one thing they do well, is protecting culture. See UNESCO, right? I mean, they're very good at protecting culture in general. We don't think you need a lot of expertise to preemptively take some artifacts and take them to point A to point B. This is why this is preemptive, right? So even if their contentions on efficiency are true, we still save some artifacts, some cultural heritage of humanity. Not necessarily of that country, of humanity. From the Middle East, there's a lot of Hellenic culture being spread, right, in museums because of Alexander Macedone's empire, right? It's not, culture is not an addition to just one country, one state, one people, all times in these museums, these sites. All religions were born in the Middle East, religions that are now spread all over the planet, right? So that it's not really as adjacent to a certain people as they think it is. But furthermore, we're telling you about artifacts as war targets. This was really, really important, right? They were historically used for 2 reasons. To lower morale dramatically on the other side, and to destroy the human nature of war, right? To attack the humanity of these individuals, right? Because both teams agree that these artifacts are important for these people. The comparative is whether they will like them in a museum for Switzerland for 1, 2, or 5, or even 50 years, or not have them at all. And we're telling you that not having them at all, if they're so important, is way more detrimental for them, right? But furthermore, it creates incentive. The usage of them as war targets creates incentive for further cultural retaliation, right? We gave you examples with ISIS and Shia militias that keep attacking each other's cultural sites, right? Besides destroying human heritage through this process, this takes the war and creates and moves it to a more dramatic sphere, right? We gave you examples of situations when we did this process with Darfur and we didn't, right? What happened on one side, we managed to contain the conflict and act afterwards after 2 years later to return it to Darfur when the situation stabilized. On the other hand, with Kashmir, we didn't do this, and a lot of people died in the process of defending them because they're important for them. And we don't feel it's something wrong if we can. We have the capacity, and we say we have the moral duty, if we can, to save these people from dying to protect some artifacts and wait for the situation to stabilize and send them back there, right? Their next contention was, well, you know, these countries will never get back stable. We think that firstly, that's an exaggeration. All countries get back on their feet at some point in time. We don't think that you can see that they will never be stable again. But furthermore, we feel that even in that context, even if everything they say is true on this point, we feel that it is our responsibility, and I'm moving on to the next point, it is our responsibility to future generations. Not future generations in our countries, but also in their their country, right? I mean, the future generations should have the right to decide what to do and what to take from their cultural heritage, right? And we, as the United Nations, as the world in general, and more specifically Western countries because they're the most stable, we have the responsibility to grant them this right. But we think that it's important as a responsibility for current generation, right? Because firstly, you increase availability from virtually zero to a lot, right? I mean, a lot more people will be able to see these things and understand these cultures. But we told you that we also can increase the amount of visibility. And we feel that's really important, right? Because we can understand these cultures and our history and our heritage a lot better, right? So, furthermore, before I move on, yes, you're contradicting yourself in what you're saying that all of them are going to be destroyed. First of all, you presented in your own example that people have motivation to help them. Moreover, you can have exterior help. Why you don't believe that we can protect at least some? People have motivation to help them, but a lot of people will die protecting them, and historically speaking, they didn't really manage to protect them. I mean, just if you look at Iraq, yes, a lot of people died protecting historical cultural sites, but it didn't succeed. See the movie, right? We feel that we can also save some lives, and at the same time save a great degree of cultural heritage, right? So we can do it, we have the mechanisms, we have the legitimacy as an international accredited institution specifically for protecting culture. We see no reason why we shouldn't, right? Let's go to societal reaction, the biggest points on opposition, right? They kept talking about backlash in these countries, right? How they view the West as being imperialistic, as if we were living in the 1920s. We're telling you the following thing. Indeed, as my colleague stated, probably people from Algeria or Libya would be pretty mad if France came in and said, we're going to keep this for good, we're going to do some good keeping, right? But we're telling you that the West doesn't mean US or UK or France, empires, colonial empires. It also means these countries, these troubled countries don't have an intrinsic problem to, right? All the points about backlash are essentially turned down by this thing. He said the UN is viewed as an external agent which has been conducted by US in most of its operations, which is firstly factually false. But secondarily, we feel that if the UN can do it, which is an internationally accredited institution in which the people, even if they don't have a lot of stress, they have most stress on the planet, why we shouldn't do it from all the international institutions that can act in this sense, right? Now, sir, furthermore, no way. We say that we will give them back, right? I mean, this is not either the 19th century, and we're not Russia. We're not going to come in, wage a war, and say we're going to keep them for safekeeping and never give it back. We think that realistically, these are not the principles that Western countries guide themselves in today's society, right? We are democratic countries and liberal countries, and we feel that the reason which we do is a moral reason. Right? We don't do it because we gain any sort of utility at a foreign policy level, just preserving a few artifacts from a rampant war. We feel we do it for a moral cause and for further generations. We see no reason why this horrible Western portrait would actually keep these artifacts from themselves. But more about this, about their extension, in which they talk a lot about terrorism and social paranoia, right? We feel that artifacts, if they're so important to cause terrorism in Switzerland and social paranoia, we feel that they're also worth taking the risk of going there and preserving them. Because if they're so important, right? We feel that, furthermore, it's an exaggeration to say that terrorism will start in Europe because we come to take and save some artifacts from a rampant war. If there's any reason why terrorism happens in Europe, it's because other problems which are existing in the background of cultural differences, which, by the way, as August Extension explained, we might have a better chance to solve through this measure, right? Because we have the academics, and we have the capacity of doing this without harming these people, these artifacts, and without allowing them to continue to be war targets and further harm the society. Thank you.
Taking away your legacy, we're taking away your heritage, because this is what we perceive as being the right thing to do. This is what we perceive as the United Nations, the perfect thing to do when we already know that you are ready to give your life for protecting your cultural identity, for protecting what makes your country valuable. I'm going to do 5 things in my speech. Firstly, I'm going to
we should also take on the heritage in Yemen, because we have the Houthi rebels, right? We should also take all the heritage in Darfur, and that was their sole example on which their contingent. No, thank you. The instability is contingent on the existence of those respective cultural sites. Now, what happened in Darfur is that there were two specific factions, which is the Sudan Liberation Army and the Justice and Equality Movement, that came into being rebels because they suspected that the Arab-dominated government was secretly funding other factions with guns, right? And this was their own example. We fundamentally rebutted it because that was a military problem. It was not religiously contingent. The reason for which we have taken those respective things from them is because of preservation, not due to the religious problems. 4. No thanks. That they assess that we are going to make these countries more stable, in the moment in which we are taking this culture, this historical and cultural awareness away from them, when we're immediately evacuating them. Fundamentally, that's not going to happen. In the moment in which you, by yourself, assess that Sunni Shia are so deep in conflict, and they're going to find other measures into creating the conflict bigger. No, thank you. And we fundamentally think that if you say that, or at least our impact is minimal, at least we're taking this from it, you're doing it even more, you're making the situation even more, even better, worse. Because you're making it even worse because these people don't want their heritage to be taken away from them. These people know that it's part of their cultural identity and that they're not willing to give it up just because we cheer for UNESCO. No. Good. What are the actual effects of this motion? Now, fundamentally what we're doing is that we're doing a mass mobilization with UN troops or peacekeepers or whatever. We're doing a mass mobilization in all of these countries, and we're fundamentally creating panic to the population.
away freedom and liberties for individuals, we've used that rhetoric. We're sick of using it again. We believe that when it comes to culture, which is more sensitive, because it's accumulation of religion, independence, freedom, peace, war, everything that defines a nation, we don't want to encourage for this rhetoric still to exist, right? Now, let's talk a little bit about the laboratory mouse perspective, right? You just take those buildings away, analyze their behavior, such as you would do with somebody that you put into a cave, right? And now you will be able to assess, like to draw lines, conclusions, so on and so forth. The perspective that you will send to those countries in the moment when you will take a decision to do so is that you're diminishing the relevance of their culture. For you, are just inferior to a culture, part in a museum, something that you don't put that much anxiety on. The reason why the movie that we've seen in the presentation was so repetitive is that no matter how hard those guys try, the majority of cases that they want to propose are actually minority. Not in a lot of countries that by their criteria would be considered as being unstable, a lot of people actually bomb the artifacts, bomb historical architectures, so on and so forth, right? Even if this will be what we've told you by the end of the day is that we would much rather have people fighting for those. We would much rather help them fight for them. We would much rather offer them protection rather than just come exclusively immediately after we've set the label on the country as being unstable, never found out what unstable means, whatever, and take their historical artifacts that they fear so much. Right? We believe that this is intrinsically horrible. Why? Because if they are under the criteria of unstable, countries in which such conflicts didn't arise yet, you're going to fuel them. Why? Because look, they are taking your culture away. Come with us, come join ISIS, and we assure you that we're going to offer protection to your culture, even if, of course, you're not going to do so. You're so fueling a lot of fighters to join ISIS by the fear of the West that you feel sometimes, right? But even if this wasn't, we say that they've told you that they're minimizing the impact of war in those countries. No, you're maximizing it, right? Every single time you try to take away a tool from terrorist organizations, they found 10 other ones. You've taken away their weapons, you've taken away their workers, they find social media, and guess how they are doing today? Very nice indeed. When we're going to take away this thing for them and try to hang on the rhetoric that they are going to stop, no, they are going to get even more people inside of their armies, they are going to make them even powerful. Why? Because you're going to force people to think if they are with the West or with people that come from their country that share some sort of cultural like what Bush said in 2003 is that the intervention in Iraq is going to be cheap, efficient, and is going to last a bit. Look what happened after that. This is cheap, efficient, and is going to last a bit. How is it cheap? We don't know. Which are the artifacts that come under the motion? We still don't know. Are we going to remove everything that is prone to bombing? Oh, guess what? If we're going to take away everything that is prone to bombing and it's a historical artifact, you may end up taking away half of those countries, right? It's under their threat. So for all of those reasons, I've never been prouder to propose a resolution that accidentally has been
This opposition really tried to frame the world as those artifacts should be protected only by natives because only natives understand the real value, and this value only exists because of those natives. I really don't know if that's necessarily true, but there's one thing I know to be true. Those artifacts will be destroyed alongside with people that will be dead trying to protect them, taking away, as the first quote was, everything that is beautiful in those countries. Well, there's a better comparative on our side of the house. If everything that's beautiful in Iraq is in England, that's better than everything that's beautiful in Iraq? Nowhere. England is closer to Iraq than nowhere. Second comparative, misunderstanding. Many artifacts are better than non-artifacts. Great and really not many nuanced comparison. But it's very important because the reality on the ground is we went utilitarianism today. We tried to prove that we improve accessibility to people right now and to people in the future, and we're going to do something with the conflict. We're not solving anything in the world, we're just solving some problems, right? But their response to this was, you should let people die and protect the artifacts and let them be destroyed. That's crazy logic. When you have the ability to protect both artifacts and people, just to let them die because they're irrational agents, that's not something that should happen. That's when we intervene in cases of genocide or crimes against humanity. Their response to this is even funnier. You're going to impose imperialistic views like Bush did. They're artifacts. You know how much political capital those were costed? I'm pretty sure that the US won't invade Iraq to take some statues, right? It's just absurd. So 2 points on real comparatives in this debate. Firstly, rights, secondarily, artifacts. On rights, their whole analysis was based on the idea that we're not going to give them back because we're bad people. Firstly, we can just oblige countries to give them back after a specific period of time, like we stated in the beginning. But the reality is that when we pointed that out, that Norway has nothing to do on long term with all the artifacts in the world, because they're not theirs. It's not that important for them. So we're not going to impose randomly imperialistic views because that sounds cool in a debate. But their next point was about the fact that they have the right to die. They have the right to die for everything. No, you don't. You don't have the right to die, to be individualistic, when you're going to exacerbate the conflict by accessing your right to die. What we stated is that the casus belli between Shia and Sunni is the fact that their culture. Cultural Shias kill cultural Sunnis. The reality on the ground is that we're going to take the primary casus belli from them. We're not going to say that they're not going to fight. They're going to fight less, or they're not going to fight and destroy artifacts, which is still an added benefit. Lastly, I'm just saying on their last point, and this was the main contention, that we're going to fuel ISIS because they will say American came and took us. Like, I don't think the reason for which ISIS is popular is because they can say they care about artifacts. Those artifacts that ISIS destroys are Sunni. I know are Shia. ISIS is Sunni. I don't believe that Sunni people will use Shia rhetoric in order to exacerbate their power. That's absurd. Second point of comparative, artifacts. Why are they important? They're important, firstly, for the cultural value of cultural heritage. But it's not our right to decide for future generations. This was a contention they never tackled. People in the future have the same right to access those kinds of things as I do. And if on the real comparative, those things will be destroyed, we destroy the capacity of future generations to access them. Lastly, Office Extension didn't say that we're going to research them infinitely, but we have more time to research them, more time to show the Hellenic statues that are now right now in Syria to people. So we better overall culture, reducing the discrepancy between the Middle East and the Western countries. At the end of the day, I'm probably not the most proud to propose, but still, it's very important because on a comparative, we have more people alive, more artifacts not being destroyed, and more people in the future being able to access them while not exacerbating conflict. For the sake of reality, propose.